Welcome to the Adventure Story Podcast. First, let me take 20 seconds to tell you about my new book. What if we've been looking for Atlantis in the wrong place? When an archaeologist dies protecting an impossible secret, her final message sends Eden Black racing into the Sahara to find an ancient crystal encoded with the knowledge of a lost civilization. It's the power that once turned a paradise into a wasteland. From high-speed chases through Marrakesh to an underground chamber older than recorded history, Eden must face a rogue scientist determined to use the crystal to reshape the world. Last time it awakened, the Sahara was born. This time, it could end everything. The Sahara event is the 7th in my Eden Black archaeological thriller series. Search for the Sahara event by me, Luke Richardson, wherever you get your adventures. Right, let's get on with the episode.
Ancient secrets, lost knowledge, and a mysterious tablet said to contain the key to alchemy, immortality, and the very fabric of the universe. For centuries, scholars, alchemists, and conspiracy theorists have chased the legend of the Emerald Tablet. But what if its secrets were hidden not in medieval Europe, but deep in the heart of the ancient Persian Empire? Hey, I'm Luke. I'm an author of archaeological adventure novels. I travel the world looking for stories to put into my books and to share with you right here on the Adventure Story Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Clawson, a best-selling thriller and adventure novelist who has woven this tantalizing mystery into a high-stakes adventure. Andrew's action-packed books, including the Parker Chase series, the Turn novels, and the Harry Fox adventures, take readers on high-stakes journeys through history, uncovering conspiracies that echo far into the present. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Look, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. So, the Emerald Tablet, this is what I'm excited to talk about because I have to confess, I don't know very much about this. So it'll be really interesting to pick your brains and no doubt get inspired by what you're going to say. I've read it's one of the most mysterious artifacts in history. So what is the story behind it? And why do you think the Emerald Tablet has fascinated people and fascinated you to make it the subject of one of your books?
So I think you are not alone in not knowing much about this because from everything I've read, not many people know much about it at all, and they kind of make up their own version. So I can give you a quick overview of what I found out during my research, and then you're going to have to make up your own mind about it from there. So the idea of the Emerald Tablet really is more of an idea as opposed to an actual artifact. It has been described in various stories as a green tablet or some type of jade tablet, usually has writing on it, and that writing is a recipe of some kind. Now, where did it all start? Nobody really knows, but the general consensus is it all began with this mythical figure known as Hermes Trismegistus. And Hermes, I don't know about that last name, but Hermes is a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. And this kind of came together over time. And this idea then became associated with alchemy. And eventually it arrived at there is a tablet with some sort of alchemical information on it. And nobody's really sure what it is. Maybe they're turning lead into gold. Maybe it's something else, but it's more of an idea than an actual physical object.
So it's sort of on the heels of the Philosopher's Stone and all of that sort of stuff.
Yes, yes. This goes back to, obviously, the Egyptian times thousands of years ago. But the first time of the actual Emerald Tablet comes from an Arabic text in the 8th century. So obviously, these ideas were around for 1,000 or 2,000 years before anybody actually wrote down Emerald Tablet. The Arabic texts were then translated into Latin, and it disseminated across the world until what we have today is this idea that it does contain an alchemical recipe. That's the general consensus now, or at least the most popular version of the story. And what it can produce, if you put all the right stuff together, is something called the greatest power. What's that? Nobody really knows. It's open for interpretation. So it's great for stories. It includes instructions like, this ascends from the earth to the heavens and then becomes ruler over the world, that which is above and that which is below. Now, what does that mean? I have no idea, but it's a good place to start a story. I'll tell you that much.
Absolutely right. And I love how a lot of these legends are so open-ended, aren't they? As you say, a great power, a bright light, something. It doesn't say exactly what the thing is, but it really allows the imaginative amongst us to play with that in our stories.
It does really. And it ties back to a time when I think people were really struggling to define the world and understand the world around them, usually obviously from the times of the pyramids, of the great empires in Egypt, to what some people call the Dark Ages, when people were really just struggling to make sense of the world. And one way to do that was through assigning these characteristics to certain ideas or objects and trying to explain things that were unexplainable. So to me, I think from what I believe and what I've come to see, this is as much of an idea as it is an object, and people can interpret it as they will. It's a great story, though.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So it's not a physical thing to be found. It's not like the Holy Grail or like what we imagine the Holy Grail to be. It's more of a recipe, a thing, a way of life, perhaps.
Yes, I think that something it did for folks who would reference this is it served as a source of inspiration. This emerald tablet idea, it was malleable and you could mold it to what you want it to be. For example, it pops up again, time and time again, especially when you get into, I'm sure you're familiar with the idea that people would turn lead into gold. That was the alchemist's holy grail. They wanted to obviously get rich quick. And they were always just one step away from being able to do it. If they could only find that last idea or that last secret ingredient, it would work. And that became the emerald tablet that we understand today, at least in the most popular versions of the myth.
I see. So how did you come about this legend? Because this has inspired you to pick up the pen and write that first book in this. It is the first book in your series, isn't it, that involves this?
It's one of the first ones, yes. Yeah, it's the first one that deals with an ancient artifact. So the second overall, but yes, one of the first ones. It came to my attention, honestly, kind of in a tangential manner. I saw a documentary on the tomb of Saqqara in Egypt. It's a necropolis, thousands of years old. There are all sorts of ancient kings buried there that came from the Egyptian time, pharaohs and things of that nature. And there was a reference in one of the tombs related to turning lead into gold. And it was written on the wall of the tomb. And I thought, Egyptians were into that too. I didn't realize that. That's pretty cool. So I started researching that, learned more about the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, which I think that's how you say it. And it kind of led to this idea of, well, you know what? This emerald tablet's more of a modern conception. And by modern, I mean 1,500 years ago, as opposed to 3,500. And what I thought was it would be neat if I could tie this idea of the emerald tablet as an object to an ancient dynasty from the Persian Empire, not even the Egyptians. I said, no, let's go with the Persians. They've got some interesting stuff going on there.
Yeah, so you tied them together. And tell me, why did you choose ancient Persia? Because I think that's a really interesting period in history. I think it's a part of the world as well that we don't often visit in our stories. Egypt is always visited in adventure stories. It seems to be very, very popular. Persia, just around the Mediterranean, a bit further into the Middle East, no one seems to go there. And yet it's got some of the oldest civilizations in existence.
Yes, no, that's a great point. So, in terms of how we talked about the Emerald Tablet, we went back to a Persian general named Megabyzus, and he's a real guy, and his tomb does exist, and it is incredible. Megabyzus lived around 450 years before BCE, and he was associated in history with the king Xerxes, which a lot of people are probably familiar with from the movie 300. Well, this was Xerxes II. There were a lot of these Xerxes guys. It's a pretty popular name. I'm sure you could probably think of some kings' names that you see over and over again, like King Louis XV or whatever in France. So Xerxes and Megabyzus were part of the Persian Empire, also the Achaemenid Empire. And what I wanted to do was explore what if their version of the Emerald Tablet existed back then. What would it be? Because again, it's more of an idea. And one thing that I thought that was neat was, this is actually true, in all of history, since humankind began gathering in villages, tribes, cities, states, and empires, none of those have exceeded the size of the Persian Empire when measured as a percentage of the world's population at the time. So in other words, in terms of how many people are alive at any given point in history, there's never been a greater empire that controls a portion of that population than the Persian Empire.
That's mad, isn't it? And you wouldn't even think about that. You'd think of the Romans, or you'd think of I don't know, the Mongols or something like this, wouldn't you? One of these great sort of empires with did lots of fighting, with lots of armies and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it was wild. And it was all, I think a lot of it stems from, the Middle East being the cradle of civilization, the cradle of humanity. Most people sprang from around there before they emigrated elsewhere, but they had control over the most people in the history of the world. And the idea of somebody possessing that amount of power, it was tantalizing. And I thought, if anybody's going to be able to figure out what this really means, it's probably those guys, because they're going to have all the resources they would ever need.
Yes, I agree with you. And there must be undiscovered artifacts or even civilizations themselves in that part of the world that we are yet to discover. And that's the thing that gets me excited as a writer, certainly.
Oh, so part of it, when I was watching that documentary about Saqqara, they're still uncovering tombs in there. It's kind of like the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, where they found Tutankhamun's tomb. They don't know what else is out there. So today, digs are ongoing and they're finding new tombs, and nobody knows what's waiting under the sand for us to recover. So, I think we both find that fascinating, and the what if aspect of what's coming next.
Yes, absolutely. This is something I'm researching for my next book, in fact, which will be set in the Sahara, because 10,000 years ago or something like this, that area was very tropical and had lots of forests. So it's very, very different to what it looks like today. So it's quite conceivable in my writer's mind that there could have been life in the wilds of the Sahara Desert in those times that have become buried under the sand. And because it's a desert now, no one thinks to even look there. It's no one scanning it with the LiDAR systems or whatever else that we're using in other parts of the world, because it's so vast, you wouldn't even know where to start looking.
Well, and then to carry on that point, what if somebody like General Megabyzus conquered them, and these people didn't have any written records, so nobody has any idea what's there? The thoughts that there are just completely undiscovered and unknown civilizations waiting to be found, which, if I had to guess, I would say that's certainly true. What we can learn from them is just incredible, and it's fertile ground for making up stories, which we like to do.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, I think that's true. So getting away from the Sahara and Persia and these sorts of places, or maybe not. If you could go on an expedition like this with your characters or in the style of your characters, where would you go? What would be your chosen place?
Well, I can tell you it wouldn't be the jungle, because it is too wet. There are too many things that can eat you and kill you out there.
True that.
So it wouldn't be there. Forget that stuff. I truly think that it would be interesting to uncover what we've been talking about so far, to kind of dive into the deserts where people originally came from, where there are thousands upon thousands of years of history. And as you go down, you're going to find different civilizations and the remnants of that. So I would say I would either go to Egypt and explore there, or I would like to go to probably around Rome and Italy, because even though it's still, you have modern Rome, modern Italian cities, once you dig down maybe 100 feet into the ground, that's what Rome is built on top of Rome is built on top of Rome. So I'd like to go there and see what's down beneath it. I think that would be pretty cool.
That's true. There's got to be some secrets there, and we're not even getting into the Vatican archives, which is a podcast for a different day.
That's the truth.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. You've mentioned a few there. Do you feel like there's a particular era that you continue to return to with your writing? I know you've written all over the place, Greece and ancient Egypt and these sorts of places. Is there a place that just sort of has its claws in you?
I think that the area around Europe, so in your part of the world, I think that is the most fascinating place, because for me at least, a lot of Americans came from Europe. So the history, the legends, the manner of thinking, the stories we tell, they all came over from the European part of the world. And that goes back all the way to the Vikings and to Charlemagne, and then before that to Alexander the Great. And that area, I think, provides the most fertile soil in which to plant our seeds of stories and then grow from there. It's a personal preference. I know that I know your stories, you have a vast geographic range you cover in what you write, and I think that's awesome. But I think that the most interesting stories, to me at least, and it probably stems from what I read growing up as a kid, like King Arthur stories, things of that nature, come from the European areas like France, Germany, England, places like that.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think there's a rich history in this part of the world it's also well documented, as you've said. I think it's much more difficult if you start looking at history of, as we've described, civilizations that aren't around anymore or have been assimilated by other other people, their records aren't quite as well kept, quite as accessible, I suppose.
Yes.
And finally, you sort of mentioned it there, like you're an adventure story writer. What books, movies, or legends, or travel, or places sparked your imagination into this sort of adventure story realm?
Well, the first one I think is the most obvious. The Indiana Jones movies, of course, were one of them.
Gotta be.
I think you and I are probably on the same page there. I remember sitting watching those with my dad as a kid, being scared to death when Molaron pulled that guy's heart out. But the sense of exploration was incredible. Another one, I would say, I remember reading Le Morte d'Arthur, which was the origin for the Arthur stories. I thought that was fascinating in terms of the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, blending the mysticism of that time with the semi-factual history. There probably was some guy named Arthur. Chances are he was a Roman Briton. But just the idea that back then the world was waiting to be discovered. So I'd say the written word, as much as the movies that we see. Honestly, kids' books, like if you remember the Nancy Drew Adventures, they were little detective novels. They're pretty popular here in America, I don't know, 75 years ago. Those were part of them. Those are the main ones, I'd say. Also, of course, the mummy stories, not necessarily the Brendan Fraser movies, but the idea that mixing the monsters from back then with the actual history of these great vast empires that existed that we didn't know a whole lot about until recently. Just really a kind of a bubbling stew of other stories.
Love that. And absolutely right. And I can see a lot of similarities between us both there in terms of the things that have inspired us. Yeah. Andrew, tell us where we can find you and your books online.
So just my website, andrewclawson.com, Amazon. I have all the audiobooks out there anywhere books are sold, but just my website's the best place online.
That was fantastic, Andrew. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Luke. Thanks for having me.
This is the Adventure Story Podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out today. It's great to spend some time with you. If you've enjoyed the show today, please subscribe, please like and share. It'll take you just seconds, but really helps me spread the word about the show. If you have a story you'd like me to explore, let me know in the comments or email hello@lukerichardsonauthor.com. And if you need more adventure in your life, and let's be honest, who doesn't, you might like to join the Adventure Society. This weekly newsletter is your ticket to travel with me, share real-world adventures, and find out first when a new story or season of this podcast drops. Luke Richardson Author /Adventure Society is where you need to go to sign up for all of that adventurous goodness. And if you're a fan of adventure stories like the one we've told today, check out my books at lukerichardsonauthor.com. Bon voyage, enjoy the adventure, and I'll see you next time.